Today we return to the world of Red Dead Redemption with hopes of exploring yet more lore that we haven't addressed, which is getting harder and harder as you can probably imagine. But specifically we find ourselves exploring something from the first game, and that something is somewhat aquatic. Well, arguably less aquatic than it used to be. It's something I mentioned in my previous video about the myths and urban legends of Red Dead Redemption, and learned this location was actually far more interesting than just that. And so I thought I'd dedicate more depth to it and go into detail in its own video. I am of course talking about the wreck of the Serendipity, a ruinous, partially sunken riverboat that, to an eagle-eyed player, possesses some strange details. And then of course there's the big question: how did it wind up here at Quaker's Cove, just to the north of Thieves' Landing? Is there even enough information for us to find out? Join me today as we delve into the depths, bad pun, I apologise, of the Serendipity. The Serendipity is a riverboat wreckage found in the Great Plains region of West Elizabeth. The word serendipity means the occurrence and development of events by chance in a happy or beneficial way. In other words, fortune by chance. Or, if more than one word is too much, lucky. Considering the state of the vessel, I think it's arguable the name that adorns it is ironic, as it clearly wasn't especially fortunate in the sense that it sunk. Now, most players likely encounter the wreckage of this steamboat during the Red Dead Redemption main story mission, Bear One Another's Burdens, in which we learn the remains of the vessel are being used by members of Dutch's gang as something of a hideout. The bulk of the conversation held in the automobile ride over doesn't pertain to the Serendipity at all. However, we do learn something, at least.
It's not far now. The old Serendipity wreck has been used as an occasional criminal hideout for years. We were informed that Vanderlyn and his gang are making camp there.
So the wreckage of the Serendipity has been used as a criminal hideout over the years. Now what's interesting about that statement is the Serendipity wreck hasn't actually been here for many years. In both 1899 and 1907, as indicated by the open world setup of Red Dead Redemption 2, the rundown jetty of Quaker's Cove is noticeably shipless. This means it must have come to sit here at some time between 1907 and 1911 when Red Dead Redemption is set. That doesn't make Agent Edgar Ross's statement anomalous, immediately speaking, but ordinarily saying something's been there for years implies it's been there for longer than just a few. The statement isn't necessarily incorrect, but considering the Serendipity is nowhere to be seen just a few short years prior, it does seem like an irregular application of the words. Could this just be a Red Dead Redemption 2 retcon? Of course, in fact, more than likely, just perhaps to the lightest degree possible because Ross's statement isn't technically incorrect. The vessel had been here for a time that could be measured in years, but the expression to me implies more than just 3 or 4. Anyway, learning the boat gets used every now and then as a hideout is also useful. However, every time we come here outside the mission, the place is eerily silent. There's nobody here, and the protagonist often acknowledges that.
This place is deserted.
The most life this place has is a horse that spawns at the hitching post here, which is likely for gameplay convenience rather than because canonically a horse just happens to be there. In the main story mission, Dutch Vanderlyn's gang are actually here, but they use it to stage a trap rather than because it's their hideout. And that makes sense, it's hardly actually well hidden. There's one access point in and out from the wreckage, and that would make it able to be fortified, but that's only really ideal in the event the hideout is compromised, and Ross appears to have known about this place for a good while. And also considering how effectively Dutch's gang use it to stage an ambush, it doesn't seem like an ideal place to be. And though they still get wiped out by John Marston, it wasn't possible to see them coming until you were right in the middle of their trap. Anyway, that's irrelevant. If Ross says the place has been used by criminals in the past, then it probably was. Who am I to question the trustworthy word of Edgar Ross? Nonetheless, we've narrowed down when the Serendipity arrived here to between 1907 and 1911. However, how did it come to be present at Quaker's Cove? Well, we know sort of where it came from. Beneath its name on the stern, We can make out the name of the Serendipity's port of registration, I presume. And it reads Tallulah Jetty, which is interesting, as Tallulah Jetty is the cut name of a settlement initially intended to be in Red Dead Redemption 2. However, it was cut from the game, though others have speculated that it was just renamed to Van Horn, and what was actually meant to be Van Horn was cut, and Tallulah Jetty was simply renamed to it. Nonetheless, the Serendipity being registered to Tallulah Jetty means that it's canon and out there somewhere, beyond the explorable world of Red Dead Redemption 2 at least, and if the state of Van Horn Trading Post is any indication as to what Tallulah Jetty is like, then it could quite plausibly be a lawless town, not dissimilar to Van Horn nor Thieves' Landing, which is not far from where the Serendipity wound up. And if the vessel did originate from a town full of reprobates and poorly educated individuals besides, it would explain why the ship's registered port is spelt wrong. You see, just because Tallulah Jetty is nowhere to be seen in Red Dead Redemption or Red Dead Redemption 2 doesn't mean that it doesn't exist somewhere in the Red Dead universe. In fact, in Red Dead Redemption 2 there is a newspaper article titled Tallulah Jetty Gang Killed, albeit spelt beginning T-A, not T-E, as seen on the boat. If there is, or at least was, a Tallulah Jetty gang, there's probably an actual Tallulah Jetty out there, and that unseen location may be of meagre relevance to the Serendipity, despite the spelling difference, as having two Tallulah Jetties would be very confusing from a game design perspective. However, knowing where the riverboat came from doesn't explain how it wound up here. It clearly ran into a spot of bother while operating and sank, and the immediate evidence suggests that Quaker's Cove wasn't the original site of that. The vessel is caked top to bottom in algae and seaweed, even on parts of the boat nowhere near the water level, implying that at some point it was entirely submerged in deeper water. So it's likely it sank elsewhere and was raised and brought to Quaker's Cove. Why? I have no idea why you would bother, unless the water it sank in was deep enough to envelop it entirely, but not deep enough for a boat to pass over the top of the sunken Serendipity. That, or it contained something significant that required it to be raised. So with this in mind, maybe it initially sank further out into the part of the river it presently occupies, or indeed somewhere in Flatiron Lake. For some reason in Red Dead Redemption 2, boats just sink out there for absolutely no reason whatsoever. It's actually quite amusing. Maybe it's just an example of that. But jokes aside, surely there's a story out there in the games about the wreckage of the Serendipity. Well, the good news is there is, but it isn't as in-depth or as satisfying as you might hope. While exploring the Great Plains, you may come across a campfire, and if you choose to rest by the fire, this is a potential story that gets told.
You ever hear the old-timers talk about the wreck of the Serendipity? Said that boat was cursed by a woman who had been cheated on.
I never did hear such a thing.
Her husband, the captain, died in a terrible way. It's still cursed. Dutch's gang and some government men spilled a lot of blood up there.
Now this campfire encounter is interesting for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it implies that the Serendipity is cursed, and that undoubtedly helped spread the rumour that the place was haunted, which became a myth because, as far as I can see, it isn't. However, the opening of the dialogue pops to me as well. Did you ever hear the old-timers talk about the wreck of the Serendipity, implying the original fate that befell the vessel occurred a long time prior to the 3 or 4 years maximum it's been present at Quaker's Cove? We also can't discredit the notion of a curse entirely, as the Red Dead games are known to have encounters that aren't explainable with ration and logic. But that doesn't mean an old wives' tale is by default credible. Red Dead Redemption's campfires frequently address stories from Red Dead Revolver, and apparently that's not canon to this universe. So therefore, as far as Red Dead Redemption is concerned, that story is folklore, and there's a good chance the Serendipity being cursed could be as well. In fact, considering we know that Serendipity occasionally gets used as a criminal hideout, it would make sense for a general story to spread, explaining the ship away to be haunted or cursed, as a means to keep the God-fearing and otherwise upstanding members of society away. Because a shipwreck is a curious thing, and if you're a criminal and you're hiding out in a shipwreck, you don't want random people to come along and have a nosy. That said, this being the wild Red Dead universe, it is entirely possible the Serendipity's captain did cheat on his wife, and his wife cursed it. However, that being an old-timer's tale is also curious, considering the Serendipity only arrived at Quaker's Cove in the past few years, although that could just be an oversight or a touch of laziness on Rockstar's behalf when developing the open world of 2, as every mention of the Serendipity thus far in 1 implies that it's been there, or at least been known, for a very long time. So perhaps originally that was intended to be the case. Another theory I've seen proposed online is one I don't think gets taken awfully seriously for good reason, and that is that the Serendipity is the ferry from the Blackwater job that went wrong in 1899. The ferry upon which Dutch van der Linde killed Heidi McCourt and John Marston was shot. However, Arthur's journal in Red Dead Redemption 2 portrays the ferry from Blackwater as an entirely different kind of paddle steamer. A side wheeler more akin to the Grand Corrigan than the Serendipity, which is a stern wheeler. So it's fair to say the Serendipity played no role that we can tell in the Blackwater Massacre. So all this rambling and we're still nowhere close to figuring out how the Serendipity came to sink. Perhaps a loony theory or two won't go amiss. In my research I found various anecdotes suggesting other campfire stories telling contradicting tales about how the Serendipity came to rest where it does. However, they seemed dubious, so I reached out to a fella who goes by Kid Colt, who's a bit of a Red Dead genius, and he didn't know of any other confirmed campfire stories regarding the Serendipity, nor could he find any, and I trust his findings. Outside the one campfire encounter, I also couldn't find anything online or in-game myself that would propose another in-universe theory behind the fate of the Serendipity, and even maybe its occupants. All we have is the story that the ship's captain cheated on his wife, and as an act of revenge, she caused the boat to sink by casting a curse. Maybe the story is mostly true and actual physical sabotage came into play, or perhaps it's a vague reference to the Delta Queen, a paddle steamer aboard which the Captain Mary Becker Green died in 1949. And though that vessel is still waterworthy, employees and passengers since have reported paranormal activity aboard which is attributed to her ghost. Now such a reference would be vague at best because that theory relies on information the one campfire story we know about simply does not volunteer. That theory aside, it's entirely possible the Serendipity sank for innocent reasons deeper into Flatiron Lake and was towed to an abandoned jetty to be stripped of precious materials and or to be simply moved out the way. But I wanted to conclude by proposing my own theory. I'm not entirely sure how good it may or may not be, but I'm sure you'll tell me. The original site upon which the Serendipity sunk is likely either in Flatiron Lake or nearby to where it actually is, and that's a border region between the United States and Mexico. That within itself means absolutely nothing, but hang on. We know the vessel has some relation to Tallulah Jetty, which may have originally been intended to be the name of Van Horn Trading Post, a rundown dump of a port town that has fallen into disrepair by 1899 and noticeably has no law presence. We also know of the existence of a Tallulah Jetty gang, and that paints the picture of a not particularly nice place. With that in mind, the Serendipity, despite just being a passenger vessel, may have been operated by not particularly nice people, and that made me look into the idea of river pirates, which is what it says on the tin, pirates that carry out attacks on rivers rather than people from Bristol terrorising the Caribbean. That would certainly explain why its final resting place is an abandoned dock just north of Thieves' Landing, a town known for its unscrupulous characters. I also didn't have to research very long to find examples of bodies of water along the US-Mexico border, infamous for being hotspots of river piracy, specifically a reservoir known as Falcon Lake. Furthermore, in Red Dead Redemption 2 there are more tongue-in-cheek references to pirates in Flatiron Lake and along the Lannahechee River, a small boat on an island in the lake within which you can find the tricorn hat. A weapon known as the Broken Pirate's Sword can be found near Saint Denis along the Lannahechee. And though those artifacts are attributed more to more stereotypical pirates and are likely implemented in the game as humorous novelty items, it does suggest Flatiron Lake and its surrounding waterways have seen some pirate activity. What benefit nefarious sea criminals would get from the Serendipity, which appears to be a passenger paddle steamer, is entirely unclear, but it was a cool idea to run away with. But it could also mean the Serendipity ran into conflict and was sunk as a result. That, or it could have been the target of said river pirates. However, there are mitigating factors to such a theory. Firstly, it strikes me as something that Edgar Ross would have dropped in conversation. Secondly, if the Serendipity met an interesting fate, why would there be rumours told around campfires that contradict it or don't incorporate it? Third, it still depends massively on mental gymnastics and speculation based on half details. It is entirely possible the Serendipity was set upon by either outlaws or bandits, and was moved to nearby to Thieves' Landing because the people there aren't the kind to ask any questions. But of course, to conclude that as accurate, I would need more information than the games provide. But a riverboat carrying potentially wealthy passengers would certainly be a good target for capable criminals, and it would also make sense for criminals to claim it as a hideout if they had some agency over where they put it. The Serendipity is a strange spot in Red Dead lore. It's completely missing in 2, which confuses matters an awful lot, and yet characters in 1 speak about it as if it's been there for far longer than in reality it has. Not much is known about its actual fate, but it's been a cool location to explore and try to piece together. Actual information regarding it is fairly thin on the ground, so I suppose you'll have to let me know what you think about my a bit out there theory. But that's where I'm going to conclude today's video on trying to get to the bottom of the Serendipity's arguably unserendipitous fate, and I'd like to thank you for sticking out me rambling for 17 minutes. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends, all that wonderful stuff. It helps me massively, and with any luck, I'll be seeing you all very soon with another video at some point. But until next time, please take care, and goodbye.